"If you dance this waltz, I'll make you Duchess," mocked the Duke, until Grace silenced the ballroom. The Caromere ballroom blazed with chandeliers, their light dancing upon jewels and silken gowns like liquid gold. Fans fluttered in delicate hands, opening and closing to the rhythm of whispered judgments. The season's most coveted invitation had drawn the cream of society, and the air hung heavy with expensive perfume and poorly concealed ambition. In the center of this glittering circus stood Grace Ilven, her simple cream gown a stark contrast to the peacock display surrounding her. A painter's daughter pressed into service as companion to elderly Lady Whitmore, she had no business standing upon these polished floors where lineage determined one's worth. Yet there she was, her chestnut hair arranged simply with a ribbon as pale as her complexion, her eyes cast downward as conversations hushed around her. "The companion thinks herself a guest," someone whispered, and the murmur rippled across the ballroom like wind through wheat. Fans snapped shut, gloves tightened around crystal stems. At the far end of the room, elevated by both position and birthright, stood His Grace the Duke of Aurelion. Tall and severe, with dark hair and cold blue eyes, Aurelion Vane represented everything Grace was not: wealth, power, certainty. His gaze swept the room with practiced disinterest, a predator too bored to hunt, until it landed upon her unadorned figure. "Who is she?" he inquired of Lady Maren Firth beside him, his voice carrying just far enough to freeze the space around Grace. Lady Maren's painted lips curved into a smile sharp as a letter opener. "A companion, Your Grace. The daughter of that failed artist who drowned herself in the Thames last winter. Lady Whitmore's charity case." "Indeed?" The Duke's eyebrow arched with cruel curiosity. "And what brings such a modest creature into Caromere tonight?" "Lady Whitmore took ill, yet wished her invitation not wasted." Maren's fan opened with a snap. The girl delivered her mistress's regrets, and was bid stay for a single dance by the Countess. The orchestra began the opening notes of a waltz, the violin singing with a sweetness that belied the cruelty about to unfold. The Duke straightened his immaculate cravat and moved with predatory grace through the parting crowd. As he approached, Grace felt rather than saw the circle widening around her, isolating her in a ring of judgment. "Miss Ilven, I presume?" His voice was cool velvet, smooth and dangerous. She raised her eyes, grey-blue and unflinching. "Yes, Your Grace." The Duke's smile did not reach his eyes. "I understand you are without a partner for this waltz." The assembled guests leaned forward imperceptibly. The air stilled as if the very room held its breath. "I had not intended to dance tonight, Your Grace." Her voice was soft but steady, the voice of one accustomed to navigating treacherous waters. The Duke's laugh rippled through the assembly, releasing a wave of titters behind gloved hands. "But surely you did not come to merely observe. A young woman at a ball without dancing is like a painting without light, present yet unremarkable." Grace's fingers found the simple ribbon at her wrist, a nervous gesture quickly mastered. "I came to deliver a message, sir. The dancing was not of my consideration." "Then allow me to give you consideration." His voice rose, ensuring the entire assembly would bear witness. "If you dance this waltz, I'll make you Duchess." The ballroom erupted in shocked laughter. The jest was cruel, impossible, a mockery dressed as an offer. The daughter of a disgraced painter, elevated to Duchess. It was theatre of the absurd, and the ton was its eager audience. Lady Maren's laugh cut above the rest. "Your Grace tempts fate. What if she accepts?" "Then I shall honor my word," he replied, bowing with exaggerated courtesy toward Grace. "What say you, Miss Ilven? Will you claim a duchy with your dancing?" Grace stood motionless, the center of a storm she had neither invited nor deserved. The music hovered, waiting. The guests watched, anticipating her humiliation. Would she flee in tears or worse, accept and prove her presumption? She touched the ribbon at her wrist once more, and in that small gesture found the memory of her mother's hands guiding her own across paper and canvas. Art required courage, life even more so. "I dance not for titles, Your Grace," she said, her voice clear enough to carry across the hush that had fallen. "But if music plays, I shall answer its call." The Duke's smile froze, not expecting dignity where he had sought distress. He extended his hand, a challenge in his eyes. "Then, let us begin." The conductor raised his baton. The violins drew breath. Grace placed her ungloved hand in the Duke's. Her touch was light, yet in that moment something passed between them, a current of recognition that neither anticipated. His eyes widened slightly, and she felt his fingers tighten around hers. "The first waltz belongs to Miss Ilven. the Duke announced, loud enough for all to hear. "Let the assembly bear witness." The orchestra began to play in earnest, and Grace stepped into the waltz as if stepping into her destiny. The murmurs of the ton grew, a tide of disbelief and judgment, but as her feet found the rhythm, something unexpected happened. She danced, not with the learned grace of a debutante, but with the natural elegance of one who understood that movement was music made visible. Her body translated what her ears received, each step precise yet flowing, as if she had been born to turn beneath these very chandeliers. "She will falter," Lady Maren predicted, her voice shrill with anticipation. Common blood always reveals itself. Yet Grace did not falter. With each turn, the whispers grew fainter. With each step, the mockery in the Duke's eyes gave way to something else. Curiosity, then surprise, then a reluctant admiration he struggled to conceal. The crowd that had gathered to witness humiliation remained to witness grace. The waltz continued, and with each measure the ballroom's atmosphere transformed. What had begun as sport was becoming something no one had anticipated, least of all the Duke himself. His hand at her waist felt the perfect posture beneath the simple gown. His steps met with flawless response. This was not the awkward fumbling of an unpracticed girl, but the natural movement of a woman who understood her own body's harmony. "You dance as if born to it," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear, surprise evident in his voice. Grace's eyes met his without faltering in their step. "My mother believed beauty existed in all forms of expression, Your Grace. Dance was merely one of her teachings. The failed artist," he said, recalling Lady Maren's words. "The devoted mother," Grace corrected gently, though her eyes flashed with momentary fire. "Failure is often a matter of perspective." The Duke found himself momentarily silenced by her quiet dignity. He had expected tears, fear, perhaps even clumsy gratitude for his attention. Instead, he encountered a composed mind behind those grey-blue eyes, one that refused to be diminished by his sport. Around them, the audience's mood shifted. Ladies who had raised their fans to hide smirks now lowered them to observe more closely. Gentlemen who had anticipated amusement now watched with grudging respect. The music seemed to swell in response, the violins singing with renewed passion. "The entire room watches us," the Duke noted, steering her through a particularly complex turn with unconscious precision. "They watch you, Your Grace," she responded. "I am merely the object lesson." His brow furrowed. "Object lesson? Indeed." Her skirts whispered against the marble floor as she followed his lead. "Tonight they learn that mockery is poor sport when the target refuses to be wounded." The Duke's step faltered, barely perceptible, yet monumental for a man of such controlled bearing. She had named his cruelty without accusation, stated fact without emotion. It was a skill few in his circle possessed, where barbs were wrapped in silk and truth obscured by politesse. "How you speak boldly for one in your position," he said, recovering his rhythm. "My position affords me little protection, Your Grace. Truth is often the only shield available to those without title." The dance carried them past Lady Maren, whose face had soured from amusement to displeasure. She beckoned to Lord Rawlins beside her, whispering words that sent his gaze following the dancing couple with new interest. "I think perhaps you have displeased Lady Firth," Grace observed, her voice neutral. "Lady Firth is often displeased when attention wanders from her orbit," the Duke replied, surprising himself with the candor of his response. "She fancies herself the sun around which the ton revolves. Then she must find the night most disappointing." For the first time, the Duke of Orléans smiled, not the practiced curve of social obligation, but a genuine expression of unexpected pleasure at her wit. The smile transformed his severe features, lending warmth to what had seemed carved from marble. The music rose toward its crescendo, and he guided her into a series of turns that brought admiring murmurs from the crowd. Her response was impeccable, as if they had rehearsed for weeks rather than met moments ago. There was a rightness to their movement together that defied explanation, a harmony neither had anticipated. As the final notes approached, Lord Rawlins stepped forward, his face a mask of aristocratic disdain. "A touching display, Your Grace, though I wonder if your jest extends to a second dance." The question was a barb, designed to remind all present that this was mockery, not genuine attention, that Grace was entertainment, not equal. The Duke opened his mouth to respond, but Grace spoke first. "His Grace has honored me sufficiently with one dance, sir. I would not presume upon his generosity further." Her words were perfect, humble without being obsequious, gracious without appearing eager. She curtsied as the music ended, preparing to withdraw. Remarkable restraint, Lady Maren commented, her voice carrying across the now quiet space. Though perhaps wisdom rather than modesty. Art without noble blood is merely spectacle after all. A ripple of nervous laughter followed her pronouncement. The spell that Grace's dancing had cast began to fracture under the weight of social reality. She was still a companion, still fatherless, still poor. One dance, however well executed, changed nothing. But then the Duke did something that silenced the room more effectively than any music ever could. He retained her hand as she made to withdraw, his fingers closing gently but firmly around hers. "I find, Miss Ilven, that I am not yet satisfied with our discourse," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed ballroom. "The gardens of Caromere are particularly fine this evening. Would you permit me to show them to you?" The invitation was unprecedented. A garden walk was intimate, deliberate, the sort of attention reserved for serious courtship, not casual mockery. Lady Maren's face drained of colour beneath her rouge. Lord Rawlins's jaw tightened visibly. Grace herself appeared momentarily at a loss, searching the Duke's face for signs of continued jest. Finding none, she gathered her composure. "I should be honoured, Your Grace." The Duke offered his arm, and as she placed her hand upon it, a visible tremor ran through the assembly. Fans fluttered frantically as a wave of whispers surged in their wake. "She has bewitched him," someone hissed. "He cannot be serious," another replied. Yet the Duke's expression, as he escorted Grace toward the terrace doors, was one of perfect seriousness, and something else, something that might have been curiosity or respect, or perhaps the first stirrings of a more profound sentiment. The night air greeted them with the scent of roses and lily, a welcome respite from the perfumed closeness of the ballroom. Stars scattered across the velvet sky, and soft lantern light illuminated the garden paths. Grace inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "You have caused quite a stir, Miss Ilven," the Duke observed, his tone impossible to read. "I believe that was your intention, Your Grace," she replied quietly. He paused their walk, turning to face her fully. In the lantern light, his features seemed softer, less imposing. "My intention was entertainment at your expense. The result has been unexpected." "In what manner?" "You were meant to fail, to stumble, to reveal yourself as unworthy of the attention I mockingly bestowed." His honesty was brutal, yet somehow more respectful than continued pretense. "Instead, you have shown more grace under fire than most who were born to privilege." She raised her chin slightly. "Perhaps grace is not the exclusive province of the well-born, Your Grace." "Perhaps not." He studied her face, seeing beyond the simple features to the character revealed in her composure. "Tell me of your mother, the artist." The request surprised her. "My mother believed beauty could redeem even the most broken circumstances. When we had nothing else, we had her paintings and her music." "And your father?" "A clergyman who died of fever when I was small. He left us his books and his belief that dignity costs nothing, yet is beyond price." The Duke nodded slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. "And now you serve as companion to Lady Whitmore." "Who has been most kind," Grace affirmed. "She encourages my reading and permits me time to practice my mother's teachings. Your dancing reflects those teachings well." The compliment hung between them, sincere and weighty. Grace inclined her head in acknowledgement, but offered no false modesty. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable but contemplative, as if both were reassessing the encounter that had brought them to this moment. From the ballroom, the orchestra began a new melody, drifting through the open terrace doors like a reminder of the world they had temporarily left behind. "We should return," Grace said. "My absence will be remarked upon, and not kindly." "Let them remark," the Duke replied, a new edge to his voice. "I find I care less for their opinions than I once did." Grace smiled, a small but genuine expression. "A dangerous sentiment for one in your position, Your Grace. Perhaps danger has its merits." He offered his arm once more. "Shall we?" As they turned back toward the light and music, neither noticed Lady Maren watching from the shadows, her face contorted with an emotion far darker than mere displeasure. The return to the ballroom brought a hush that spread like ripples in still water. The Duke of Orleans, escorting the painter's daughter with the same formality he might offer a duchess, presented a tableau that defied every social expectation. Grace felt the weight of stairs upon her back, heard the rustle of fans and the intake of breath as they passed. "Your Grace," Lady Maren stepped forward, her voice honey over steel, "Lord Hastings has been most anxious for your opinion on his new hunter. Might I relieve you of your obligation, so that you may speak with him?" The implication was clear. Grace was an obligation, a momentary amusement now concluded. The Duke was being offered a gracious exit from what had surely been an extended jest. The Duke regarded Lady Maren with cool assessment. "My obligations, as you term them, are mine to determine, Lady Firth. I find Miss Ilven's company refreshing in its sincerity." A flush crept up Lady Maren's throat, staining her décolletage. "Sincerity is often the refuge of those without refinement, Your Grace. And refinement without sincerity is merely veneer," the Duke countered, his tone hardening. Thin and easily scratched, the exchange hung in the air between them, a challenge issued and received. Lady Maren's eyes narrowed, calculating her next move in a game suddenly altered beyond recognition. Lord Rawlins appeared at her elbow, his expression one of practiced concern. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but there is a matter of some delicacy. Lady Whitmore's footman has arrived with a message for her companion. It seems the lady's condition has worsened." Grace's composure faltered for the first time that evening. "I must go to her at once." "Of course," the Duke agreed, though his eyes held suspicion as they regarded Rawlins. "Permit me to arrange my carriage for you." "Most generous, Your Grace," Rawlins interjected smoothly, "but arrangements have already been made. The footman waits even now." Grace found herself torn between duty to her employer and wariness at the too convenient timing of this summons. She looked to the Duke, uncertainty evident in her eyes. "Then I shall escort Miss Ilven to ensure all is in order," the Duke stated, his tone brooking no argument. But Lady Maren was not finished. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a register meant for their ears alone. "Consider carefully, Your Grace. The Tun watches with great interest. A jest is amusing. Continued attention to such a girl invites speculation of the most unfortunate kind." Grace stiffened, understanding perfectly the insinuation. Her reputation, however modest, was her only possession of value. The Duke's attention, initially meant to mock, could destroy her completely if misconstrued. "I should not wish to be the cause of unpleasant speculation," she said quietly, withdrawing her hand from the Duke's arm. "Lady Whitmore requires my attention, and I have imposed upon Your Grace's kindness far too long." She curtsied, the movement as graceful as her dancing had been, dignity evident in every line of her body. "I thank you for the dance, Your Grace. It shall be a memory I treasure." The Duke's jaw tightened, recognizing the careful retreat for what it was. Not rejection of him, but protection of herself. "You have been most accommodating of my whims this evening, Miss Ilven," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent space surrounding them. "Before you depart, however, I wonder if you might satisfy one more." Grace hesitated, wariness evident in her eyes. "If it is within my power, Your Grace. Earlier this evening, I made a declaration in jest," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "If you dance this waltz, I'll make you Duchess," I said, "and you have danced most admirably." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Lady Maren's fan stilled in her hand. "Your Grace jests again," Grace said softly, a flush rising to her cheeks. "I do not." His voice was firm, his posture straight as a soldier's. "I find, Miss Ilven, that I have developed a profound distaste for mockery this evening. You have shown grace under fire, dignity in the face of derision, and wisdom beyond your years. These qualities are far rarer than blue blood and far more valuable to a man in my position." He stepped forward and took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture of unmistakable respect. "I do not ask for your hand tonight. That would indeed be presumptuous after so brief an acquaintance. But I do ask permission to call upon you properly, with the intention of courtship." The silence that followed was absolute. Not a fan moved, not a breath sounded. The entire ballroom seemed suspended in disbelief. Lord Rawlins recovered first. "Your Grace, this is most irregular. The lady has no family, no connections. The lady has qualities that recommend her far beyond accident of birth," the Duke interrupted, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "What say you, Miss Ilven? Will you permit me to call upon you at Lady Whitmore's residence?" Grace stood motionless, overwhelmed by the public nature of his request, and the sincerity evident in his gaze. This was no jest, no sport at her expense. This was a man who had begun the evening in mockery and ended it in admiration. "Your Grace honors me beyond measure," she finally said, her voice steady, despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "If Lady Whitmore has no objection, I would welcome your call." The Duke smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features. "Then it is settled." "Nothing is settled," Lady Maren hissed, abandoning all pretense of decorum. "This is absurd. Your Grace cannot possibly consider—" "What His Grace considers is not subject to your approval, Lady Firth," came a new voice, crisp with authority. The crowd parted to reveal the Countess of Caromere herself, regal in silver and amethyst, her white hair arranged in elaborate coils beneath a diamond tiara. She moved forward with the confidence of one who had ruled society for decades. "Your Grace," she addressed the Duke with a small nod. "Miss Ilven, I believe congratulations are in order." The Countess's approval, so unexpected, sent a fresh wave of shock through the assembly. If she endorsed this irregular courtship, none would dare openly oppose it. "Thank you, my lady," the Duke replied, inclining his head with respect. "Your support is most appreciated." "I have observed the events of this evening with great interest," the Countess continued, her shrewd eyes taking in Lady Marin's outrage and Lord Rawlins' poorly disguised dismay. "It is not often one witnesses true character revealed through both challenge and triumph." She turned to Grace. "Miss Ilven, I understand Lady Whitmore requires your presence. My footman will escort you to my personal carriage, which shall convey you safely to her side." The implicit message was clear. The Countess herself was ensuring Grace's protection, both physically and socially. The supposed urgent summons, likely fabricated by Rawlins and Marin, was being graciously accommodated, while simultaneously exposed as unnecessary. "You are most kind, my lady," Grace said, curtsying deeply. "Not kind, my dear, merely observant." The Countess offered a thin smile. "I recognize quality when I see it, regardless of its packaging." She turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying effortlessly. "The next set begins in 5 minutes. I expect to see dancing, not gossip. This is a ballroom, not a fish market." The spell of shocked silence broke and conversation resumed with nervous energy. The Countess nodded to the Duke. "You may escort Miss Ilven to my carriage, Your Grace. I shall expect a call from you tomorrow to discuss this development." "Of course, my lady," he agreed, offering his arm once more to Grace. As they moved toward the exit, the orchestra began to play again, a gentle waltz that seemed to follow them like a benediction. Grace held her head high, aware that every eye still followed their progress. "You have caused quite a scandal, Your Grace," she murmured, when they reached the grand staircase. "I have merely recognized value where others saw opportunity for cruelty," he replied quietly. "The scandal will fade, true character endures." At the bottom of the steps, the Countess's magnificent carriage waited, lanterns glowing against the night. The Duke handed Grace up into its plush interior, then stood for a moment framed in the doorway. "Until tomorrow, Miss Ilven," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Until tomorrow, Your Grace," she replied, her smile small but genuine. As the carriage pulled away, Grace caught a glimpse of Lady Marin watching from the top of the steps, her face a mask of thwarted rage. But the sight inspired no fear, no trepidation, for in the space of a single waltz, everything had changed. The wheels turned on cobblestone, carrying her away from the ballroom where she had arrived as an object of scorn and departed as a woman of consequence. Behind her, the Duke of Orléans stood, watching, until the carriage disappeared into the London night, his expression thoughtful. In the silent ballroom the music continued, but the harmony that had briefly united two souls from different worlds lingered more powerfully than any orchestral arrangement. The ton would talk for weeks, scandalized and fascinated in equal measure, but for Grace Ilven, the painter's daughter, and Aurelian Vane, the Duke who had learned to see beyond title and circumstance, the evening had brought a different kind of music, the first notes of a melody that would continue long after the season's last dance. 6 months after the fateful waltz at Caromere House, Grace stood before the mirror in what had once been Lady Whitmore's best guest chamber. The elderly woman, far from requiring urgent attention that night, had recovered splendidly upon hearing of the Duke's interest in her companion. Indeed, Lady Whitmore had thrown herself into the role of surrogate mother with unexpected vigor, declaring that she had always seen something extraordinary in Grace. The gown that reflected back at Grace now was a far cry from the simple cream muslin she had worn to the ball. Ivory silk embroidered with seed pearls fell in graceful folds to the floor, and a single diamond pendant, the Duke's first gift, rested at her throat. Her chestnut hair had been arranged by a lady's maid, though she had insisted on keeping her mother's simple ribbon woven through the elegant coiffure. A soft knock at the door announced Lady Whitmore, resplendent in lavender silk and family diamonds. "My dear, you look transformative. The Duke will be rendered speechless," Grace smiled, touching the ribbon in her hair for reassurance. "I hardly recognize myself, my lady." "Nonsense," Lady Whitmore declared, adjusting the fall of Grace's veil. "The gown may be new, but the woman remains unchanged, which is precisely why the Duke chose you." The courtship had proceeded with remarkable speed, yet proper decorum had been observed at every turn. The Duke called at Lady Whitmore's townhouse thrice weekly. They walked in Hyde Park under appropriate chaperonage. He sent books rather than jewels, engaging her mind before adorning her person. And when he finally proposed, it was not with grand speeches, but with simple truth. "You have taught me to see beyond the veneers of society," he had said, kneeling before her in Lady Whitmore's drawing-room. "I find I cannot imagine returning to blindness." Now, as Grace descended the staircase to where a magnificent carriage waited to convey them to St. George's, Hanover Square, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the daughter of a failed artist to the bride of one of England's most powerful dukes, the path had been neither planned nor anticipated. Lady Whitmore fussed with the train of Grace's gown as the footman opened the door. "Remember, my dear, shoulders back, chin level. You are to be a duchess, not a mouse." Grace laughed softly. "I shall endeavour to find the middle ground, my lady." The journey to St. George's passed in a blur of anticipation. As the carriage approached, Grace could see the crowd gathered outside. Members of the ton, curious onlookers, even journalists eager to report on the season's most unexpected match. Lady Maren had spread vicious rumours in those first weeks, suggesting everything from witchcraft to impropriety, but the Countess of Caromere's unwavering support had silenced the worst of the gossip. The carriage door opened, and Grace stepped down into the spring sunshine. A pathway had been cleared to the church door, lined with people straining for a glimpse of the bride who had captured the Duke of Orleans. Inside, the church was filled with flowers, not exotic blooms imported at great expense, but English roses, bluebells, and lily of the valley, reminiscent of the simple beauty Grace had always appreciated. The organ played softly as she stood at the entrance, Lady Whitmore arranging her train one final time before taking her place in the front pew, and then she saw him, standing tall before the altar, his profile sharp against the stained glass. The Duke turned as the music changed, and their eyes met across the length of the church. His expression, usually so controlled, softened visibly. In that moment, titles and society fell away, leaving only a man and woman who had found in each other something authentic in a world of careful performance. Grace moved forward, each step carrying her toward a future she had never imagined. The guests murmured as she passed, some approving, others still scandalized by the match, but their opinions mattered little now. What mattered was the journey begun on a ballroom floor with a cruel jest, continued through a courtship of genuine discovery, and culminating here, before God and witnesses. When she reached him, the Duke took her hand, his touch warm and sure. "You are radiant," he murmured. "And you, your Grace, appear almost human with happiness," she replied softly, the gentle, teasing evidence of the comfortable intimacy they had developed. His smile, once so rare, came easily now. "I have found that happiness is more attainable than I once believed." The ceremony proceeded with solemn dignity. Vows were exchanged, rings placed upon fingers. The Duke's voice remained steady as he promised to love and cherish. Grace's carried clear and true as she pledged her faithfulness in return. When the clergyman pronounced them husband and wife, the Duke of Orleans turned to his new Duchess, and in full view of the assembled guests, brought her hand to his lips in a gesture of profound respect that preceded their first kiss as a married couple. Outside, as they emerged into spring sunshine, the crowd's reaction was mixed. Some applauded, genuinely moved by the romance of the unlikely match. Others maintained a frosty silence, still uncertain how to receive a duchess of such humble origins. Among them stood Lady Maren, her face a careful mask that did little to hide her displeasure. Beside her, Lord Rawlins watched with calculating eyes, already adjusting his strategy to accommodate this new reality. The Duke, sensing their scrutiny, placed his hand protectively over Grace's as he handed her into the waiting carriage. "The ton still debates your worthiness," he noted once they were settled inside. Grace adjusted her veil, a small smile playing at her lips. "Let them debate. We know the truth of it." He studied her face, still marveling at the quiet strength that had first captured his attention. "And what is that truth, my Duchess?" "That worth is proven, not presumed," she replied. "That grace may be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes a waltz is more than a dance. It is destiny." The carriage pulled away from the church, carrying them toward the wedding breakfast at Orleans House, where the Countess of Caromere waited to formally present the new Duchess to society. But for this brief journey, they were alone, suspended between the life Grace had known and the one that stretched before them. "I made you a mockery of a promise that night," the Duke said, his voice soft with regret for his earlier cruelty. "If you dance this waltz, I'll make you Duchess." "And I danced not for the title but for the music," she reminded him. "The outcome, however, has proven most satisfactory." His laugh, warm and genuine, filled the carriage. "Indeed it has, my Grace. Indeed it has." As the carriage rolled through London streets, the spring sun caught the diamond at her throat, sending prisms of light dancing across their joined hands. Outside, the world continued its ceaseless movement, the ton with its judgments, society with its rules, life with its unexpected turns. But within the carriage, two people who had found each other across divides of class and circumstance sat in comfortable silence, bound not by convention but by something far stronger, the recognition of true worth, discovered in the space of a single waltz. And in drawing rooms across London, the story was already being told, of how a duke's mockery had been silenced by grace, how a ballroom had witnessed the beginning of an improbable love, and how, sometimes, the most beautiful dances begin with the most unlikely partners. The moral of our story is clear. True nobility resides not in titles or bloodlines, but in character and grace. The Duke's mockery transformed into admiration when confronted with Grace's dignity and authentic talent. In a world obsessed with appearances and social standing, it is our actions, not our circumstances, that reveal our true worth. What mockery cannot diminish, Grace can elevate. When faced with cruelty, Grace chose dignity over despair, composure over complaint. Her response to humiliation was not to shrink but to shine, demonstrating that sometimes the most powerful answer to derision is simply to rise above it with grace. If this tale of redemption and recognition has touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. When have you witnessed dignity triumph over mockery? How has grace silenced your own ballrooms of doubt? Your stories enrich our community, creating a tapestry of shared wisdom and experience. Should you wish to join us for more tales of redemption, romance, and the triumph of character over circumstance, consider subscribing to our channel. Each week brings new stories of hearts transformed and lives redeemed, all awaiting your discovery. Until our next dance of words, remember that sometimes the most beautiful waltz begins with the most challenging step. Grace silenced the ballroom not with anger or argument, but with the quiet dignity that transcends all social barriers, a lesson as timeless as the music that brought two unlikely souls together.